from the West Bank. So it's wonderful to have this Iranian threat. And you've even had Netanyahu say, well, we can't withdraw from the West Bank until this Iranian threat is removed. I can't work out what the connection between the two is, but he believes it's there, or pretends to believe it's there. So anyway, I think that's another reason why this policy is objectionable. What would be a sensible policy? Well, it's not difficult to conceive of the policy of the deal that we could have had in 2005, if only we'd been ready to countenance a certain amount of Iranian enrichment. They would only have enriched to 5%, whereas you need 90% for a weapon. They would have allowed the IEA inspectors to be on the same site in the enrichment plant round the clock, if that was what they wanted, so that if there'd been any attempt to reconfigure the centrifuge machine so that they started producing 90% enriched uranium instead of 4% enriched uranium, the world would have heard about it very quickly, and the Security Council could have met to decide what needed to be done. They were anyway prepared to give a very, very solemn assurance that they had no desire to acquire nuclear weapons, that on the contrary it was against their religion. It's un-Islamic to possess these things because they're horribly destructive. We Westerners, of course, in our cynical, secular way, tend to dismiss that as just, lies. But I'm not so sure, actually. I mean, I've spoken to a number of Iranians, and even if you don't believe that it is quite as contrary to their religion as they maintain, there is the important fact that this ban on the possession of nuclear weapons has come out of the mouth of their supreme leader, and his authority would be undermined if it suddenly became apparent that actually people had been ignoring him and had been developing nuclear weapons. And if there's one thing he does care about, it's his authority, because it's bound up with the survival of that Islamic regime. So anyway, I mustn't rabbit on, but I think we could have the kind of deal we should have had in 2005, accepting enrichment in return for very, very stringent verification measures, safeguards, and so on. This would obviously reduce tension in the region and reduce the risk of war. It would, I think, minimize the risk that Iranians would be tempted to misuse this capability that we can no longer deprive them of. They have this enrichment capability now. They're not going to give it up, however badly we treat them. They're determined to hold on to it. Much better to treat them well, try and establish a much more normal, cordial kind of relationship with them, so that they won't feel so isolated from the West. They won't feel so offended by us, and won't be tempted, therefore, to misuse the capability. And then, of course, it would allow us to start investing in Iranian oil and gas, which would have a very beneficial impact on the world economy. Now, the good news is that President Obama, having given us all quite a fright back in December and January by misrepresenting the last IEA report, which came out in November, and implying at least that the IEA had evidence that Iran was building nuclear weapons. The report didn't say that at all. It merely said that there was evidence that prior to 2003, the Iranians had been doing research into how to make a nuclear weapon, which you heard me say is definitely the case. Two very different things. Anyway, so a certain amount of misrepresentation. I can now see, with the benefit of hindsight, that was designed to make it politically possible to push through still more sanctions on Iran. The reason for those sanctions was to give the president political space to revert to the policy of engagement that he had when he first came into office in 2009. And that policy of engagement was a very good policy. People like me were extremely relieved when he came in early 2009, because it all went horribly wrong, because first of all the disputed elections and the repression built up political opposition to that policy in the United States, and then the Americans were impatient when the Iranians failed to respond as quickly as the Americans wanted to what was described as a confidence-building proposal. Anyway, we're back in a sense where we were in early 2009, with the Americans actually wanting, I think, I believe, I hope, to negotiate an agreement with the Iranians. And I think the Americans have understood that that agreement will have to entail allowing Iran to enrich. However, the Israelis are still opposed to allowing Iran to enrich, so you must expect that there will be massive pressure on the Americans from the Israelis not to allow Iran to enrich, and it remains to be seen whether the President will have the political strength to withstand that pressure. And of course there will also be massive pressure from his own Congress, because Iran has very few friends in the American Congress. They regularly vote through by a majority of 80 or 90% hostile anti-Iranian resolutions. So the good news is re-engagement, real perspective for a deal. The bad news is that there will be these spoiling attempts by Israel and by Congress and by neocons, by all those who, for whatever reason, are still unreconstructed and don't want there to be a deal. Also, I have to say that the Iranians aren't always very sensible. If you provoke them, they're liable to sort of lash out and do something that gets misperceived in the West and fuels this Western perception that you can't trust the Iranians, or these Iranians are terrible people. So particularly if the spoilers engineer provocations. Back in the first few days of January 2002, after the Iranians had been so helpful over Afghanistan, 3 weeks before President Bush branded the Iranians as evil, a ship was intercepted which the Israelis claimed was carrying arms from the Iranians to Hamas. Now, it's possible that it really was carrying arms to Hamas, in which case it was stupid of the Iranians, quite simply, but it's equally possible that this was actually a kind of coup monté. This was an Israeli provocation designed to disrupt and put an end to the good feeling generated by Iranian help during the previous months. And so we could see some more provocations, and if we do, we can't be certain that the Iranians will react as sensibly as they should. But however, having said that, there is something new in Iran, and that is that as a result of elections this year, the supreme leader is now very confident about his authority. Iran is not the monolithic autocracy that we tend to think of it as. It's actually got a kind of oligarchy in which there are different groups competing for power. And many of you may have read over the last year that Ahmadinejad, the president, did try last year to take on the supreme leader, to challenge his authority, but he lost. And the most recent elections show that he lost big. So the supreme leader is now very strong, and it's not unlike the position that Khomeini was in August 1980, when he saw off all those leftists I told you about earlier, and he felt strong enough to authorize the opening of negotiations, which led 5 months later to the release of the American hostages. So the Iranians are possibly more united than they've been in the past, and that may reduce the risk of them, or likelihood of them doing something silly. I really am nearly there now, but there are other problems, other clouds on the horizon, very few. The French have been very reluctant to abandon the 2003 policy. under President Sarkozy. They've been really the most hawkish of all the Western powers, but of course we now have a new president, and my hunch is that Monsieur Hollande is going to be more reasonable and flexible and less inclined to try and use this issue to show that he's a big, tough, natural fellow, determined to do what's necessary to defend French interests. And then I detect that even though the mood has improved so much in the last few months, there's still in our public statements this tendency to say, well, we must put the Iranians under pressure, and sanctions are a very good thing because it's brought Iran back to the negotiating table, and you've really got to screw down these Iranians, otherwise they'll sorry, I've lost my train of thought really. But I think you understand what I'm trying to get at. We're not really, still not handling them very adroitly, is what I'm trying to say, and I'm not certain whether we will in time. Yes, because what one really wants is a classic negotiation, which there's a wonderful handbook on negotiation called Getting to Yes, which two Harvard academics produced about 30 years ago, and that says that what you have to do is identify where your interests overlap, and nearly always there's going to be some overlap. So you've got to find where they overlap, and then you have to sit down and negotiate honestly ways of giving expression to that overlap. And I'm not sure I feel 100% confident yet that the West is really going to engage in that kind of negotiation with Iran. Already, although in Istanbul last month there was reference to the need for this negotiation to be based on the principle of reciprocity, admirable, very good thing. What I'm picking up is that the West is thinking, well, can we get as much as possible out of the Iranians while giving as little as possible ourselves? And if we go in with that attitude, anyway. So I think that really is the end. But if I had one message, it's because it's possible that this negotiating process that was launched in Istanbul last month, and that's going to be resumed in Baghdad next week on the 23rd, and we hope there will be a succession of meetings stretching out in the months ahead. Don't expect quick, early results. This kind of negotiation is extremely complicated. It will take time. Don't forget, in 1954, when we negotiated with the Iranians compensation for what became BP, in those days it was called the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, that process lasted nearly a year. The Iranians are very intelligent people, and they're determined to defend their own interests. They're not going to be rolled over, so this is going to last a long time. But please, if you can, if you want to, write to your MP, use whatever channels of pressure you have in order to try and put the government under pressure to negotiate with Iran in the kind of sensible getting to yes way that I've just very briefly alluded to, but I can see that at least one person knows exactly what I'm talking about, and I'm sure many more of you do as well. So there we are. I do apologize if I've gone on time. I'm afraid more like 45 minutes than 30, but please throw any questions you want at me.
I don't think we've minded you going on at all. I mean, we've got it from the horse's mouth, and you're a very distinguished horse, if I can put it that way.
Not really, but thank you. No, not really, but thank you.
No, I'll just say I would like to chair this. I say this because on other occasions I've sometimes seen people holding up their hand patiently, and then somebody else starts bellowing off without even looking at the chairman. I haven't been the chairman on those occasions. On this occasion I am. I will try and stop bellowers, and please do hold up your hand if you want a question, and I will take you as soon as I can.